Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Candice Cole, and I thank you all for joining me today for this inaugural episode of On the Record with Candice Cole, myself. I am a journalist, currently a Washington correspondent with Global News out of Canada. I've also done some work here locally in DC with DC News Now and loads of other experience, former TYT, former Black News Channel. So it is really my honor and pleasure. I thank you all for joining us. And if you're not able to catch it live, please feel free to watch the replay. So I am very excited and honored to have our guest with us today. His name is Hassan El-Tayyab. He is the Legislative Director for Middle East Policy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Hi, Hassan. Welcome. Thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us to have this really important, timely conversation. I was just in the middle of introducing you as the Legislative Director for Middle East Policy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And you also co-chair the U.S. Ceasefire Coalition. I believe the last time that we, really had a chance to sort of work with each other, you were telling me about your work on the Yemen War Powers Agreement stuff. So you also, work to end the humanitarian crisis there in Yemen, advocate for Palestinian human rights, and also advance diplomacy with Iran. And so I imagine that now is taking up a huge portion, of your time, as we are now in the midst of this conflict, this war that seems to not have any end in sight. So thanks again, Hassan, for joining us today.
Appreciate you having me on, truly.
So I just want to, there's so many moving parts to this war. I've been covering it since the very beginning. And, just yesterday, I just want to sort of like bring us up to speed on where we are, where things stand right now with the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran. The Israelis yesterday apparently killed Iran's head of security, Ali Larijani, thought to be running the country in the midst of this conflict. He was killed in an overnight airstrikes Tuesday, and that, of course, was confirmed by Iranian officials. And then meanwhile, here in Washington, where we're both based, we're getting mixed messages from the president. It's been sort of total whiplash since Sunday. First, President Trump asking for NATO to get involved. But of course, there's been no invasion here, no attack here. So there's really no, justification for invoking, Article 5 that would get NATO involved. So maybe there's, just a bit of ignorance, to put it lightly, on how that process actually works. But after then being rebuffed by our allies, France, Germany, Japan, the UK, all saying that they're not going to get involved with securing the Strait of Hormuz, which is, again, for folks who may not understand how that works, but it's a major artery that's responsible for the transport of about a fifth of the world's oil import and export. So after that happened, and he goes and says, he doesn't need their help. In the backdrop of all of this, people are paying with their lives. Over 800 people so far in Lebanon alone have been killed. And then we've lost our own service members here in the U.S. So, this was initially something that maybe brought a brief glimmer of hope to the Iranian people with the assassination, I guess you could say, of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But that's sort of, there was talk of regime change, but it just doesn't seem to be playing out the way that either the U.S. or Israel, may have thought it would. So I just want to see what you make of all this before we really dive in.
Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
This is just an absolute disaster. This is a war of choice led by the United States and Israel. This escalation is already costing civilian lives, thousands across the region. We've seen about 1,500 or so confirmed dead in Iran, casualties in Lebanon. The Israeli government has used this as an excuse to block humanitarian access in Gaza. We've seen escalations in the West Bank. And the longer this goes on, the worse the human suffering is going to be, the worse the mass displacement is going to be, and the harder it is going to be to de-escalate. We're also seeing that this is harming global security and the global economy. I mean, the instability we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz, some analysts are predicting that this could push the entire globe into a global recession or even a global depression if action isn't taken urgently to address the conflict. And you got to ask, how is this not foreseen by the Trump administration? I mean, this is why past presidents had restrained themselves and not attacked Iran, among other reasons. So were they not thinking clearly? There was no real pretext and, given to the American people. Again, we have a democratic republic here. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress, not the president, is supposed to declare war. There's been no authorization, no AUMF from Congress, and no real debate has happened that has brought the American people in Congress along. And this is already extremely unpopular. The president's popularity on this is underwater. And the American people just don't want another regime change war. We've seen what regime change wars look like. We've seen Iraq, we've seen Afghanistan, we've seen Libya, we've seen thousands of US soldiers die, millions of civilians die, and the United States spending trillions of dollars in taxpayer money when we have an affordability crisis right here at home that's only going to get worse with these global energy shocks. We'll also say that what hopefully we've learned, the American people have learned, is that diplomacy is the way to really address all of these different issues. There's no real military solution to address the conflict with Iran. There are disagreements. There are a lot of concerns to be addressed, but what we've been seeing, which is very clear, and what a lot of us peace activists have been saying, is that war is not the answer to the conflict between the United States and Iran, whether it be around the nuclear issue, the ballistic missile issue, whether it's sanctions, or whether it's support for proxies around the region, which are all really intense and important issues to address. But we're not going to solve them by bombing Iran. We're just going to see entrenched hardliners. We're going to see more regional instability. And honestly, I'm very concerned for the region. I'm concerned for the world. I have a lot of family in the region, in Jordan. I've got some extended family in Palestine. And my heart goes out to everybody that is just, again, tired of endless forever wars that we've seen in the Middle East. So what we're calling for is for Congress to pass a new Iran war powers resolution to block unauthorized strikes by the Trump administration. We may be seeing a vote teed up by Senator Booker later tonight around 5 or 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we're also urging Congress reject billions more in funding for the war against Iran and across the Middle East. So we're expecting a potential supplemental to be coming after the April recess. And last but not least, we're asking Congress and everyone to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire while there's still time.
Yeah, and Hassan, to your point, I mean, regime change has just not really been our thing, and I feel like I'm watching, like Napoleon 2.0. First, there was Venezuela. We don't know what the end solution is going to be there. Folks there thought that there would be actual regime change. It doesn't look like, that's the case right now. Same thing with Iran. And while in the midst of this, now talking about Cuba, so a wider net certainly has been cast. But in respect to that, I'd love for you to go over just a little bit of the history of Iran, like how we got here, because it for so, all intents and purposes, it seems like maybe a bit of a full circle moment, not a completely closed circuit, but we sort of got here because of U.S. involvement in the first place.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because this historical context is so important. I think to understand the moment, you have to go back to 1953 when the United States helped orchestrate a coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mossadegh to reinstall the Shah. The Shah ruled as an authoritarian ally of the United States for decades. And that repression that we saw under that government helped fuel the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which brought about the Islamic Republic and the Ayatollah's reign. So since then, U.S.-Iran relations, as you can imagine, have been, fraught, defined by mistrust, repeated cycles of escalation, missed opportunities for diplomacy, and there have been many flashpoints. We saw the hostage crisis, we saw sanctions, proxy conflicts, whether it be support for Hezbollah, support for the Houthis in Yemen and Hamas. And we've also seen that diplomacy has worked to de-escalate the situation. I think the most important example is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, otherwise known as the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration. That was the gold standard of arms control agreements. It was working. It was successfully constraining Iran's nuclear ambitions. And they've claimed that they never wanted to pursue nuclear weapons, but they did want a domestic energy stockpile. And we saw Donald Trump rip up that agreement in 2018. And unfortunately, that set off a chain reaction. We saw Iran expand its nuclear activity and its enrichment. We saw diplomacy collapse. We saw more support for proxies and just really an escalated situation. Unfortunately, President Biden missed a critical opportunity to get back in the JCPOA. And Trump obviously, pursued a different route as well. And, that disastrous decision to tear up the Iran nuclear agreement, I think, helped lead to the moment we're in today, where we have a massive escalation involving so many regional players, and things are escalating by the minute. And so where we are now is a result of escalation compounded by this direct military confrontation by the United States and Israel. And again, didn't start overnight, and the consequences are absolutely severe. And it's a result of people prioritizing military escalation over sustained and difficult diplomacy, but needed diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing is very reminiscent of weapons of mass destruction. Back in 2003, when George W. Bush went after Saddam Hussein. Do you feel like this is, somewhat the same situation, maybe a little bit more nuanced, but, for some, it just seems to be all about the oil, not just this move, but prior moves, i.e. Venezuela as well. What's your take there?
Yeah. What do they say? History, doesn't always repeat itself, but it usually rhymes. There are some deeply concerning parallels to the war in Iraq, and some differences that we should note as well. In both cases, we're seeing the use of military force by the United States, justified by fears of nuclear weapons program, and a narrative that really suggests that war is inevitable and that we needed to use force. There was also significant pressure on U.S. lawmakers by Israeli leadership in both accounts, including but not limited Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has long wanted to establish Israeli hegemony over the Middle East. So I think that's another factor, which is what in part pushed Donald Trump over the edge here. And that really should raise alarm bells. But again, it's not identical. Iran is a far more capable and integrated military. The IRGC is deeply entrenched in the, and they have a much different terrain that they can use to defend themselves, where Iraq was a flat desert and was, more easily, taken over by the U.S. military. Granted, we can get into the long insurgency and the millions of people displaced and millions of civilians that died. But Iran is just a way different terrain. And because of that mountains that they have, there's just way more protection. And it's going to be a much more difficult military operation. So in that way, this is a way bigger military operation than even what we saw in Iraq, which was very extensive and cost us trillions of dollars, cost thousands of soldiers' lives. So it can just give you a sense of where this could be going if the United States does try to pursue a full-on ground invasion, which the Trump administration has floated. And is it about the oil? Not entirely. Again, I think there are other things going on here. Part of it, this is in the aftermath of October 7. I think, Israel's like really pushing to defeat both Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, and really this whole proxy region and establish itself as the regional hegemon. The way the oil really does factor in, though, is obviously the Strait of Hormuz. This is a critical choke point for oil, but not just oil around the world, also fertilizer and other critical minerals and supplies. And this conflict, we've already seen gas prices spike, to over $100 a barrel. If we don't button this up, it could get even worse. And if the Houthis get involved and try to block flows from the Bab el-Mandeb Strait as well, things could get even worse. And if Israel and the United States attack Iranian oil facilities, they've already done some of that. We could see Iran retaliate against Aramco. We could see Iran retaliate against other oil infrastructure in Qatar and across the region. And we could also see Iran attack desalination plants. There are a few key desal plants in Saudi Arabia that if those were taken offline, that could be an absolute disaster for Saudi and the Gulf states. They could also go after Israel's desalination plant. So this really, we're on an escalation ladder here that's absolutely concerning. It's impacting, civilians across the region, as I said, and also impacting, Americans right here in the United States. I'm sure Canadians are also feeling the pinch here, and everyone's going to. So this is about power. It's about regional dominance and economic interests. And so it's concerning. There's a lot of parallels, but some of the differences between the Iran and Iraq war are also pretty terrifying too.
And to your point about the desalination plants, because last week I reported where Beirut had said, one of their facilities was struck by Iran, and Iran said that the same happened from the U.S. on Qasem Island. So really, as you are saying, this could be a domino effect that no one is really, I don't think, maybe conceived of what could actually be at play here.
Finger on, I forgot one thing. I thought it was kind of one more thing on that last point, and thank you. The other difference is that, for better or worse, the Bush administration after 9/11 really had the support of the American people initially. He had about 80% approval, and he did that by bringing people along. He got an AUMF from Congress, the 2002 Iraq AUMF, to authorize use of military force against Saddam Hussein. It just actually 20 plus years later, it just got repealed by Congress. For what it's worth. And the Bush administration also was able to, again, I totally disagree with the war, but there was an approach by that administration to kind of bring a coalition on board. Mm-hmm. Where the Trump administration hasn't given any justification to the American people, to the international community, hasn't received authorization for use of military force. And, some of the attempts to try to, pressure NATO allies and others over to send warships into the Strait of Hormuz isn't going so great if you've been reading the headlines, because, if you're not going to, get people involved in the takeoff of the plane, it's going to be hard to get them involved in the landing. So he's just not really done the job of bringing together the American people and an international coalition to pursue military force in this region. And it's hard to, and he's paying the consequences. And, his polling is really low right now and getting worse. And I think that's just going to increase. And also you're seeing major splits in the Republican and MAGA base over this. Commentators like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others are up in arms and really upset with the administration, saying, wait, I thought we were supposed to be America first. This doesn't seem like that. So I wanted to add that one point, that the whole context of the war is also different from the Iraq war back in the early 2000s.
Right. And that lack of support, it just sort of underscores it just seems as if Congress has just had their legs, taken from underneath them. There's been absolutely no checks or balances where, this is concerned. And yeah, his party is completely, it is splitting, if not split already. I'd like to, you mentioned that you have still friends and family, in the region, in Jordan. And I'm just wondering, what you're hearing from them, if you're in contact with anyone who is in Iran or who is also Iranian still in the region, what the sentiment, is there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking that. My family is in Jordan. Everyone's safe for now. But we've seen that these escalations, can really have devastating impacts on communities and civilians across the Middle East. In the 12-day war, there were drones that were shot down and hit my family's town of Madaba. And, again, no one was injured, but it's just, the cost of war is usually paid, by innocents and innocent civilians, including the girls' school that was attacked in the first hours of the war. Over 170 students and faculty killed by a U.S. missile. Again, a devastating reminder of the impacts of the war on innocent civilians. We've been in touch with diaspora networks in the U.S., partners on the ground, civil society contacts. And we're hearing a lot of fear. We're hearing a lot of things that are, complex and contradictory, where there is real anger at the Iranian government, and in some cases, even some relief that some of the leadership was taken out and even weakened. But that across the board is not translating into support for Israel and the United States doing these carpet bombing runs of Tehran and Iran across the region. So as the bombing continues, what we're, I think, going to continue to see among these communities that we're in touch with and others is that, there's going to be fear, grief, a growing sense of abandonment, and growing pain. And civilians, again, are bearing the brunt. Families are displaced. Infrastructure is destroyed. Lives have been upended. And, Iranians often feel like they're caught between this rock and a hard place, where they're worried about the repression from the Iranian government, but they don't see an alternative with, Israeli bombing runs on their cities and towns. So what we've advocated for is that what we need to do is relieve sanctions, empower moderates and the middle class and Iranian civil society, and then slowly work towards reform and not push for a massive regime change war and boots on the ground, or push for some sort of balkanization where we're supporting the Kurds and other factions and trying to break Iran up, which is only going to lead to mass displacement and mass suffering. I mean, we look at, there are tens of millions of people in Iraq. There's 90 million people living in Iran. If you can imagine what that could lead to if they really push for a civil war. So my heart goes out to everybody listening to this program who's impacted by this. And, I think the bottom line is people want safety, they want dignity, they want a future, and the war is taking that all away from them.
Yeah, my heart really goes out to everyone, and I hope and pray that your family will remain safe. Those that are still there in Jordan. I want to ask about this, and just, there has been some support before this all happened for Reza Pahlavi and he had, when this first happened, he had, come out and said that he would be happy to lead some sort of transition. Can you talk a little bit on that, and if that is, possibly a realistic outcome, what that might look like, because not everyone is on board, with that as a solution, as I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might be pockets of support, but definitely nothing substantive that could get rid of the current regime. In fact, we're seeing reports of consolidation by the Iranian government. We replaced one Ayatollah for another one with the same name. And we're seeing the IRGC really crack down. People are really worried about even speaking out. So if there were plans to have some sort of uprising among the Iranian people, that's all wiped away. I think and the other thing is, with the bombs falling so heavily on Iran, there's also a rally around the flag effect. So everything they're doing is backfiring if they truly wanted, a transition of power. Their approach of pushing for a really aggressive bombardment of Iranians, civilian infrastructure, and civilian cities and towns, completely backfiring, and it's doing exactly what we all said would happen, which is empower hardliners, entrench the current government, and it's just tragic. I don't know what else to say, and I think these pipe dreams of having people coming from the outside, whether it's these different leaders, whether it's the Kurds, whether it's these other factions, just doesn't seem connected to reality, and it just lacks strategic thinking and really lacks empathy.
And I want to bring it back to, what you had said in the beginning, where you all are pushing for this war powers agreement to be passed in the Senate. We sort of saw this, fail in the House, a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just wondering, if you can just sort of tell us what kind of support, is there for this? Do you, in your estimation, do you feel that there's going to be a real chance at this passing? And then if it does, how could that lead to a possible off-ramp for this?
Yeah. Good question. So there's a couple things there. We had votes in the House and Senate. They both narrowly failed. Let me talk about the House first, because you brought that up. We saw it was 219 to 212. We saw 4 Democrats flip to join the Republicans, and every other Democrat stayed on board. We also saw 2 Republicans flip and join the Democrats, Rep. Massey and Rep. Warren Davidson. And so, granted, these are mostly along partisan lines, but I think it's significant that you're getting any Republicans to flip right now. So that's a message that the Republican base is not unified, and that there is this growing opposition. And as Americans continue to feel the pain of this, whether it be the images of civilians being slaughtered and murdered by U.S. bombs like the girls' school, whether it be the reports of U.S. soldiers coming back in body bags and caskets, like we've seen, and 200 soldiers were just reported injured from some of these strikes. We've got 13 plus killed, and the numbers just growing by the day. And also the energy shocks. I think as that continues, you're going to see these votes get more and more competitive. And people are going to start realizing on the Hill that, wow, there's going to be a major political cost I'm going to have to pay if I continue voting affirmatively to support the president's reckless, immoral, and disastrous war in Iran. So I think the idea is we're going to force many votes. So even if we lose, we get the benefit of having the debate, having it in front of the American people. And again, this is a midterm election year, and people can use that information to make their choices at the ballot box. We saw another vote in the Senate. I believe it was 47 to 53. We had Senator Fetterman jump over with the Republicans, Democrat from Pennsylvania. And then we had Senator Rand Paul jump over and support the measure with the Democrats. That was another strong vote. Almost the entire Democratic caucus stayed on board. And I think it also put pressure on the Trump administration and, made folks that are a little bit uneasy with this war against Iran, folks like Senator Young, Senator Collins, Senator Murkowski, and others, that is going to, again, cost the administration, politically. It's going to have them expend political capital and, again, center this debate. And over time, I think we're going to see more and more people defect. And I also think the American people are going to start, more mobilization efforts to oppose the war, especially as it starts to become a bit more personal when they can't afford their energy bill, when they can't afford to get to work because transportation costs are too high, and when food prices go up as an inevitable result of this energy shock and supply chain shock. So that's a huge part of it. And grateful to senators for continuing to keep the drumbeat going. Again, Senator Booker has a resolution up for a vote tonight. Senator Murphy has one up for tomorrow. And I think Duckworth, Baldwin, and a few others, and Senator Kaine have more resolutions next week. So the plan is to keep the drumbeat going. I'll also say there are a couple other ways that we're looking at this. Basically, I see two giant buttons in front of us. We've got the escalation button and the de-escalation button. I'm on the de-escalation side. I see those war powers votes as de-escalatory. We're saying we don't want this, right? Even if we don't get the votes that we need to pass it, we're sending a clear message that this is important enough for us to try to keep forcing the question. Also, there's the Iran war supplemental vote that we think is going to come in April. Opposing that is de-escalatory. Democrats have a bit more leverage there because it's going to take 60 votes due to the procedural rules in the Senate to be able to pass that. And again, Republicans will need at least 7 or 8 Democrat defections to be able to pass that. And they don't have that right now. So that's another way we're going to do this. And additionally, there are resolutions to block weapon sales to Israel. There's a new 1,000-pound bomb, JRD, joint resolution of disapproval to block arms sales to Israel. That's a few senators are about to introduce. And I think that is another de-escalatory signal that we're not going to be complicit in Israel's war on Lebanon, Iran, or even their hostility towards Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
And if you could just go back to I believe it's the Iran supplemental agreement, if you could just briefly just sort of like tell us what that is, what it would do if it were to pass. Yeah.
If $1.5 trillion for the U.S. military wasn't enough, they need some more funds. And it's been floated in the press that the president, as the Pentagon runs out of these stockpiles, runs out of funding, because this war, again, is costing $1 or $2 billion a day. And they need to, if they're going to keep it up, they need to restock and resupply and get more funding. There's currently a slush fund that the Pentagon has that they're dipping into, and they have plenty of money there. But we're expecting the president and Congress to try to consider a $50 billion supplemental to keep the war going. And so we don't know what's going to be in it. There hasn't been text given to Congress. We're expecting that sometime at the end of March or early April, and then we'll be able to see exactly what's in there. What we're expecting is, just funds to pay for like missile interceptors, any equipment that's been damaged, firearms, just you name it, probably a lot of tech infrastructure, JDAMs, and a whole bunch of other equipment, support for the Navy. You might also see FMF or foreign military financing for Israel's military as well. So there could be a mix of things in this larger package. And we can't say too much more because we haven't seen it, but that's what we're expecting.
Yeah, I feel like we could have so many, off-ramp conversations here about everything that's at play. But I want to be conscious of your time. I do so much appreciate you coming on with me. I'd like to know, is there anything that, we're missing here? Anything that you feel that, the American public in particular should be paying attention to, as this drags out, and anything that maybe isn't being discussed currently in the mainstream media that you think we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I'm so grateful for that conversation starter. Um, the voices of civilians impacted, especially those most impacted, like Iranian civilians, are often missing. Not just folks in the diaspora, but Iranians on the ground that are having hell rain down on their cities. We often hear about the strategy, the geopolitics, gas prices, but the human costs, the families, the communities being destroyed. Again, we've seen at least 1,500 civilians in Iran die as a result of this war of choice, and not to mention the girls' school. Also, what's happening in Lebanon? I don't think the media is covering the mass displacement and the hundreds and hundreds of people that are dying as a result of the shelling of civilians and civilian infrastructure in Lebanon. We're not hearing about the West Bank and the settler violence that's escalating. That they're using this opportunity, these settlers and the Israeli military, using this opportunity to entrench their domination and occupation, entrench control over Palestinians, and not to mention Gaza, that they've blocked humanitarian access in Gaza. For what reason? I don't know. Why would they do that? Why does this war necessitate blocking aid delivery in Gaza? There's also a lack of seriousness about the alternatives to war. It's like, how many times have we heard the mainstream media discuss the potential for a real ceasefire, or putting pressure or asking really important questions about these off ramps? And, when it's framed as, oh, well, diplomacy is naive or unrealistic, when in fact it's the only approach that's been successful here to reduce nuclear risks, to prevent a large scale conflict. There's not enough conversation about the constitutional issue. This is not just a foreign policy debate. Article 1, Section 8 is very clear. The president has broken the law by not getting congressional authorization and not receiving public consent for this war of choice. So those are some areas that I think really need more attention.
And, speaking of diplomacy, that trust, we were in the middle of talks, presumably in good faith, before this bombing, everything happened a little over 2 weeks ago. So, now just even, hearing, from the Iranians, like, there is no loyalty, where America's concerned, and they are, prepared to keep fighting. And I promise you this will be my last my last question here, but is there real hope for diplomacy between the US and Iran to function again?
There's always hope. We cannot let go of hope, and we have to keep pushing. Our government is supposed to respond to the people. That's what their job is. They're representing us. We put them in office, and we need to make our voices heard, and make them prioritize diplomacy, and do everything we can to ensure that happens. The thing that the pessimistic side of me understands that Iran also has a vote when you've ripped up agreements, when you've bombed the literal negotiators that are trying to end these conflicts, and bomb people that are, could be a voice for de-escalation and restraint. You're showing that you're not a good faith actor, that you're not a trustworthy actor. And so that does not make diplomacy easier. It makes it a lot harder. And right now, the Iranian government has made the choice to block critical energy supply lines and bomb infrastructure around the Middle East, and bomb U.S. military bases, and it's devastating. And from their perspective, they feel like, well, we tried this, and it got us nowhere, so they're now playing hardball. And this is exactly what a lot of us had warned, and we're seeing the consequences. But I still, again, have hope that Congress, the American people, will step up, that we can, build out a peace movement. And we may just have to build the biggest peace movement we've seen since the Vietnam War to do it. But that's what we're committed to out here at FCNL, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, with different coalitions. And the one bright spot, maybe two bright spots, is that I'm seeing a convergence between different groups, people that work on Gaza, people that work on war powers, people that work on humanitarian and human rights issues, people that are in the more conservative libertarian restrainer camp, all come together. So we have the makings for a mass movement. Encourage every one of your listeners to get involved in their own communities to try to de-escalate. We still need Canada's leaders to call for a ceasefire and to put as much pressure as they can on all parties to de-escalate and end this immediately. We know that we're going to be doing that here in the U.S. So hang in there, everybody.
Hassan El-Tayyab, Legislative Director for Friends Committee on National Legislation. Thank you so much again for your time, for breaking this all down for us. And I so appreciate your work and everything that you all are doing. And, all I can say is, keep going, keep fighting in the way in which you can. And I look forward to, I'm sure, talking with you again soon as this continues to play out.
Yeah. Candice, thank you so much for having me. And anytime, I'm always happy to be a guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much.